the food crisis plaguing much of the South and the financial crisis of the North have common roots, namely the shift towards neoliberalism since the 1970s. That brought to an end the post-war, post-Second World War Bretton Woods system that was instituted by the United States and Britain right after World War II. It had two architects, John Maynard Keynes, Britain, and Harry Dexter White in the United States, and they anticipated that its core principles, which included capital controls and regulated currencies, they anticipated that these principles would lead to relatively balanced economic growth and would also free governments to institute the social democratic programs, welfare state programs, that had enormous public support around the world. And to a large extent, they were vindicated on both counts. In fact, many economists call the years that followed until the 1970s the golden age of capitalism. That golden age led not only to unprecedented and relatively egalitarian growth, but also the introduction of welfare state measures. Keynes and White were perfectly well aware that free capital movement and speculation inhibit these options. Professional economics literature points out, what should be obvious, that the free flow of capital creates what they sometimes call a virtual senate of lenders and investors who carry out a moment-by-moment referendum on government policies, and if they find that they're irrational, meaning they help people instead of profits, then they vote against them by capital flight, by tax on the country, and so on. So the democratic governments have a dual constituency, their own population and the virtual Senate, who typically prevail. And for the poor, that means regular disaster. In fact, one of the reasons for the radical difference between Latin America and East Asia in the last half century is that Latin America didn't control capital flight. In fact, in general, the rich in Latin America don't have responsibilities. Capital flight approximated the crushing debt. In contrast, during South Korea's remarkable growth period, capital flight was not only banned, but could bring the death penalty, one of many factors that led to the surprising divergence. Latin America has much richer resources. You'd expect it to be far more advanced than East Asia, but it had the disadvantage of being under imperialist wings. From the 1970s, the golden age faded. When neoliberal rules were observed, insofar as they've been observed, economic performance deteriorated and social democratic programs have been substantially weakened. We see that right here. The United States partially accepted these rules, and for the past 30 years, real wages for the majority of the population have stagnated. Up till then, they essentially tracked growth. Work hours have increased, now well beyond Europe. Benefits, which have always lagged, have declined. Social indicators, kind of general measure of the health of the society, they also tracked growth until the mid-1970s, when they began to decline, reaching the 1960 level by the end of the millennium. Well, there has been economic growth, but it's finding its way into very few pockets, increasingly into the financial industries, which have grown enormously, while productive industry has significantly declined. We're seeing it right now. And with the decline of productive industry, of course, that means decline in living standards, in fact, even opportunities to survive for much of the workforce. The economy has also been punctuated by bubbles, financial crises, and public bailouts. So the huge bailout of Citigroup right now is nothing new. Something quite similar happened in the early 80s to its predecessor, Citibank, thanks to the U.S. taxpayer. These results were described right all through this period and explained by a few really outstanding international economists. David Felix is one. But the mythology about efficient markets and rational choice prevailed. And that's not at all surprising. These myths were highly beneficial to very narrow sectors of privilege and power, what Adam Smith called the principal architects of policy. That's another very severe institutional and cultural crisis which persists. Now, actually, the phrase golden age of capitalism is a little misleading. It might more accurately be called state capitalism. It's worth bearing in mind that the dynamic state sector was and remains a primary factor in development and innovation through a variety of measures, research and development, procurement, government procurement, public subsidy, regular bailouts, and other means. That's particularly true in the United States. It was done here under a Pentagon cover as long as the cutting edge of high-tech industry, advanced economy, was electronics-based. For that, the Pentagon served as a good cover. In recent years, if you look at government spending, it's shifting more towards the health-oriented institutions of the government. That's a reflection of the fact that the cutting edge of the economy is becoming more biology-based. That includes computers, the internet, satellites, most of the rest of the IT revolution that finally exploded in the late 90s in a tech bubble, but also much else, civilian aircraft, advanced machine tools, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and a lot more. The crucial role of the state in economic development should be kept in mind when we read these days dire warnings about government intervention in the financial system after private management has once again driven it to ruins, this time an unusually severe crisis and one that harms the rich, not just the poor, so it merits special concern. It's also worth recalling that large-scale state intervention in the economy is nothing new. On the contrary, it's always been a central factor in economic development.